Greetings everyone, and happy Wednesday to you all. This is Marty Bennett, President and Founder of SMIE Consulting, here for the inaugural Midweek Roundup Facebook Live chat. We'll be discussing a range of issues each week, Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, that will cover topics of the week that have been highlighted in news stories in international education. And we'll be talking today about a series of issues that hopefully will resonate with you in the international education community. We're looking forward to making this a regular event on our SMIE Consulting page. For those of you not familiar with my work, Social Media International Education Consulting is the full title of my business. And happy to say that after 25 years in the industry of international education, I'll be making my first attempts this week to make this a regular feature of highlighting issues that are of particular importance in our industry and giving you my take on where I stand on those particular issues. So for those of you who are interested, we'll be covering a number of topics each week. First off this week, let me just pop up the agenda for today. We'll be discussing SAT, ACT test optional news. Recently, prominent U.S. university recently went test optional for domestic students, but not for international students, interestingly. So we'll talk about that specifically. We'll talk about the latest WES Report, WES Report, World Education Service Report that came out late last month on kind of the state of international education post 2016 elections. And then also finish up with a main topic on kind of a niche topic, but for those on the international student advising side, certainly are familiar with this, related to STEM designation for particular academic programs. This will focus on business majors in particular with this issue here and how that seems to be a growing trend, particularly for graduate programs that might have been suffering lately with downturns in international student flows that they've previously been dependent on. So we'll talk a little bit more about what the creative ways institutions are using to address STEM needs and international student needs in the process. So that's our roundup for today. We'll finish with a couple of short highlights on international ACAC and the World Cup. But wanted to make this a regular event of maybe a half an hour or so of conversations that will hopefully provide some context for some of the issues we're dealing with in international education at this time. And want to share with you now some of what I have to say on particularly the issue of becoming test optional. And the first issue I'll share with you is an Inside Higher Ed story that featured a week or so ago, actually earlier in June, related to the University of Chicago and their decision to become test optional. This decision came shortly on the heels of a recent study, also highlighted in Inside Higher Ed, that shared that those schools that had gone test optional in the past, a couple of 3 years, had actually, the dangers were, well, is it going to really get you your class you want? And the results of that study showed that that diversity was actually improved when SAT and ACT scores were removed from those institutions that had gone test optional. Now, becoming test optional is not a new trend. It's something that hundreds of colleges, in fact, have been doing for a number of years. But the University of Chicago's move is one of the first very top research universities in the country to make that kind of a decision. So interesting to see what happens with that. For those who are curious about who is actually test optional in the United States right now, that list is actually a fairly substantial one. Right now, more than 1,000 colleges and universities are test optional for SAT, ACT. That list is a little bit deceiving for international audiences. It's a much smaller list that are actually, of that 1,000, that are actually test optional for international. So the links I'm providing in the comments section will hopefully give you a bit of research information to further explore this on your own, where your institution lies. You probably know that, but see who if your competition is test optional. And that's always one of the things that I encourage institutions to do as they're looking at various policies related to tests required, but also regarding English language testing and that type of thing. So the fair test list that you see linked in the comments section is specifically for the full 1,000, more than 1,000 schools, colleges, and universities that have decided to go test optional. Certainly welcome to check those out as part of your research. I also wanted to share, because we're talking international issues here, wanted to share a particular list that is directly relevant to international students. And this list was first published at the International ACAC conference 2 years ago at Rutgers University in New Jersey. That list, it's a Google Drive list, but it's a PDF that a couple of presenters used at that conference of 225 or so colleges and universities that had become test optional for SAT, ACT test optional for international students, particularly relevant obviously for undergraduate students. That list was produced by Sarah Loring de Garcia from the American School Foundation of Monterey and David Hanna at the York School in Canada. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them. They're probably at the International ACAC conference in New Orleans this week. And their work a couple years ago helped provide a great resource to counselors and students around the world that are looking for institutions that are test optional. So some obviously important colleges on that list as well, and those that are particularly active in the international recruitment sphere certainly would be interested to see what other schools are on that list. So becoming test optional is one of those things that I always, when I talk to colleagues, particularly those that are perhaps on the list for becoming already test optional for domestic students, is what their rationale is why they aren't also test optional for international students. So this is something that is an issue that I think deserves some attention. I know a lot of students that are international students, and certainly with my belief that every institution I've had the pleasure of working at, is we've been test optional for international students, and that's something I see as an important piece of the overall international recruitment puzzle, is looking at those tests. They're not ones that are specifically designed for international students. Understandably, more selective institutions may be looking for those minor differentiators between international students and other peers to see who might be the best fits for their institutions. Perhaps there's been relevance, but when a selective school like the very selective school like the University of Chicago gets on that list, it's certainly interesting to see where others might be going with their policies on SAT and ACT for international students. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Chicago's policy does not apply to internationals, but the story itself just raises the specter of why why international students are not included on these test optional lists from these colleges that decide to make that switch. So that's those are my thoughts on the test optional news, and certainly one thing that's as institutions in this increasingly competitive market are looking to broaden the range of students that they're able to attract to their institutions. Just something to keep in mind that by broadening the scope and reducing the barriers by having additional tests required that are not necessarily for international students is something that's worth considering. With SAT and ACT being certainly among that. What I would recommend to colleagues is speaking with your associates at other schools, competitor schools that are already test optional internationally, and see what kind of impact that's had on their incoming classes, their demographics, to see if it's helped or hurt. I'm sure it's going to be helped rather than hurt, but that's something that would be important to next steps to take if you're looking to, again, make your institution more attractive to international students, not less. So what we have next on a list, kind of following on from that important topic related to institutions looking to diversify, looking to broaden their scope. I wanted to touch on the WES report that was released last month. For those of you who are not familiar with WES, this is an organization, World Education Service, out of New York City, that is primarily a credential evaluator, but over the past few years has broadened their scope of activities to include a number of different resources for institutions to help support what they're doing. I'm pulling, just posted an article from the PI News, one of my favorite sources for international education news, from the PI, that referenced the WES report and talked about some of the issues involved. And the title of the article is "It's a Challenging Road Ahead for U.S. Higher Education Institutions," according to the WES report. For the report itself, WES has a number of great resources that they provide related to trends in international education, international student recruitment, upcoming markets, in addition to credential system expertise that they provide as well. But the article or the report that WES put out is actually entitled "Navigating a New Paradigm for International Student Recruitment." And there's a lot of important tips that they and suggestions that they come up with in their report, and certainly worth taking a look at if your institution is reviewing its strategic plan for international student recruitment or is looking to develop one. That's something that I think is important for every institution to do every once in a while. For international educators, certainly keeping fresh eyes on whatever your institution's plan is, particularly in these very turbulent times when it comes to international education, particularly international student recruitment. It's well worth considering what options are available to you, and are you on the right path as it relates to some of the key issues in the industry. So related to that WES report, they came up with 7, I think, very substantial recommendations. And these are recommendations that are actually very much a part of what international educators have been doing for a number of years, and using successfully for a number of years, in terms of putting together a very diverse and strategic and circumspect international enrollment plan. And for what it's worth, these recommendations that you see on the screen now, diversifying recruitment targets, emphasizing a welcoming environment. Obviously, we know about these through Your Welcome Here. That certainly that campaign has risen to prominence in the last few years, and certainly represents a sea change in the outward focus that institutions are putting on putting their best foot forward with international audiences in a very public way. The third item on the list, recommendation, provides support and resources. And this is something particularly for the student services folks, that is always recommended. And obviously, when you're an international education professional and you're looking to provide support services for your international students and resources for them, if you're not doing that, your institution in the long term is going to suffer because the students that come have bad experiences because there aren't enough advisors on staff, there aren't resources in the residence halls, in food service, in campus life, activity-wise that cater to international students, that you could be putting your institution at a disadvantage. So that kind of support and resources are a bedrock to long-term successful international student enrollment planning. The fourth recommendation that's near and dear to my heart, for those of you who have known me over the last decade or so, Social media and virtual outreach is very much at the heart of what I do. And thank you, Sana, for joining us today, all the way from Ramallah. Hope all is well there. Virtual and social media outreach for those who are in the international missions game is certainly an essential element in this day and age with the students that are being recruited. Is something I've always preached, is living where your audiences live. And that, in particular for international students, means online. And finding out where they are in the world and what platforms they're on are just key elements to a successful engagement strategy for students online. So that piece is always an important step that I think institutions need to make sure they have a very strong hold on as they're progressing. Now, in terms of the fifth element, engaging the alumni network for recruitment, this is probably one of the largest untapped areas for institutions as that are active in international student recruitment. And I think as you are looking for ways to navigate a very much a changing environment internationally, keeping in mind a bedrock element of any admission officer's training is the fact that as admissions officers, we are not necessarily the best recruiters for our institutions. We don't sell our institutions the best. That job is certainly done most successfully by our current students and our alumni and parents of current students. So I think it's something to consider when you're putting together plans is how in touch are you with your international alums or alums that are now living overseas? And this is something that for many institutions, when talking to international alumni, talking to alumni or advancement offices, they don't track, for the large part, don't track their international students when they've graduated and returned home, or alumni that have gone overseas, unless they've already been active and have been kept in the loop with the alumni office or are already donors, whatever it might be. So I encourage all of you to, a building block in terms of where to start here is always focusing on your recent alumni or your current students that are about to become alumni, becoming friends with them on Facebook or LinkedIn, because those are platforms that, as older students in the concept of Gen X or Gen Y, Gen Z, the digital natives that there are today, they are ones that are going to be on those platforms most likely. If not socially, they will be professionally. So that would be something I would recommend. Focus on your current students. If you don't have any information on your international alumni from alumni offices or what have you, that you can start with, focus on your recent grads that members of your office, current students might be friends with, that you can connect with in some meaningful way to start putting the building blocks in place in key markets to develop your international alumni as a resource for recruitment, not just seeing them as dollar signs for the university alumni office. And a sixth element of the WES recommendations is addressing students' financial concerns. And these are ones that you see every day, study after study that comes out on concerns related to international students who are looking at the United States, what might put them off. They often refer to the costs of education in the United States. And granted, U.S. is one of the top one or two most expensive markets, depending on cost when you factor in cost of living factors, next to Australia or the UK. So certainly institutions that make the effort to carve out financial resources for international students, whether that be in the form of scholarships that are specifically for internationals, out-of-state tuition waivers for public universities. It was a recent story a week or so ago. Eastern Michigan has a university that's been active in the You Are Welcome Here campaign, has also become designated scholarships specifically for international students that are You Are Welcome Here scholarships. So there's actually the second phase of the You Are Welcome Here campaign for year one or so had been focused on generating awareness and getting U.S. institutions to buy in and become a part of it. Now year 2, they're focusing on developing institution-specific financial aid or scholarships for international students. And kudos to Jessica Sandberg and her team at Temple University for putting that together. Great resources, and certainly a piece of the puzzle that any way your institution can see, and if they do value international students and are willing to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, carving out scholarship options for international students that are beyond just maybe a token $1,000 or $2,000 scholarship, which in the lion's share of institutions means nothing for international students. And the final piece of recommendation of WES's report was to develop and maintain partnerships. This is an important piece because these partnerships extend. The most commonly thought of piece of partnerships for international higher ed relates to agreements with overseas institutions, joint degree programs, dual degree programs, exchange programs, whatever the case may be. Those are bedrock for you and your institution in terms of connections in countries where you want to or already have significant presence, and alumni and current students and such. So strengthening those, that is an absolute important piece, and being creative about how you do that, working with community colleges or even high schools to develop potential pipelines. There are over 60,000 international students enrolled in U.S. high schools. So are you actively recruiting at some of those schools where these pockets of international students are as part of your planning? Do you have the 2+2 programs with community school colleges in your region that could be pipelines in the future for international students? So a lot of different important partnerships, but there are also partnerships in international ed are a very different beast than they were 10 years ago. Where just 10, 15 years ago, when a lot of the service providers that are now the norm that you see at NAFSA conferences in the expo hall, back 10, 15 years ago, they were really only just coming into the fore as part of an overall institutional partnership scheme for how our institutions going to reach their intended audiences. So always encourage students or institutions when they're looking at partnerships, is not just looking at institutional partnerships either overseas or domestically, but looking at potential partners within the service provider community that might be good fits for you. We've seen over the last 5 years, 5-10 years, the rise of pathway programs in the United States, and that's a whole other conversation for another day. But those are partnerships that can potentially lead to greater clarity in your international enrollment planning. So things to think about. But the WES Report is certainly great food for thought, and if you haven't already taken a gander at it, these are issues that aren't going away anytime soon. For those of you that are active in NAFSA, you're already familiar with a number of articles that have come out recently. Certainly the focus of the conference in Philadelphia was on these issues. And certainly the latest edition of the International Educator just came out yesterday. The cover, The Big Chill, exploring declining enrollments and creative solutions to combat the trend. This is referring specifically to post-election downturn in international student enrollments. So there's a great there's the first part of the article. The first part of a two-part series is called Shock to the System, and that's the name of the article as part of this NAFSA series that outlines some of their recommendations. So if you have access to the International Educator, certainly this is worth a read, and I'll post the link to that article in the comments section here in a second. So hopefully you get a chance to check that out. Again, some good suggestions there for where institutions can go to really start to analyze what they're doing and know that they're not alone with the recent downturns and what's happening there. So I certainly recommend checking all of those out. What I'd like to do now, and touching on the third and final main topic of the day, is talking about STEM. STEM designated programs are ones for those in, particularly on the student services side, you're well aware of, that are the majors that students can enroll in, that if they do, they are potentially eligible for up to 3 years of work experience after graduation, and that's at after degree levels from the bachelor's degree, master's degree, and doctoral degrees. They can potentially have up to 3 years at each level to pursue work experience. Now, this article just came out. Referencing it now on in the comments section. Was from a number of institutions in the last year or two have been focusing, particularly in their business programs at the graduate level, have been focusing on developing the M part of the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Mathematics is obviously a fairly broadly defined area, and a number of colleges of businesses around the country who perhaps at the graduate level have been losing students, international students in particular, to other schools, to other countries, particularly in Canada, over the last year or two. They are now becoming very creative in how they approach their majors, their offerings for international students. We all know, for those who are in the industry, how competitive and strategic students are in India, China, other countries about when they're looking at their destination countries for where they might study, what are the post-graduation work opportunities in those countries. Canada has been obviously very successful over the last few years in attracting students because of their study to work pathways that they have created to citizenship. And that has allowed and made Canadian institutions, frankly, very attractive. What has traditionally drawn international students to the United States, obviously the quality of higher education institutions is still there. That is still the biggest draw to international students that are looking to study outside their home countries. But in terms of those students that are looking at post-work opportunities or post-study opportunities for work, the U.S. has, beginning in 2008 when the STEM laws first came into play that added extra time to students' optional practical training ability in the United States. Those STEM programs have become magnets for many international students looking to come to the United States. And certainly the open doors numbers reflect the large number of students that are currently in the United States on OPT, with that number being over 175,000 as of the last report for open doors. Those numbers have been going up steadily because of the STEM changes. What is important about the STEM programs to keep in mind is traditionally business programs are not STEM related because mathematics is tangentially related to business, but what creative business schools have done, and the article that I've highlighted that's now in the comments section, focuses on successes that the University of Maryland's Robert Smith School of Business has had in developing 8 specialized master's programs, 5 of them being STEM designated. Now, for those on the student services and student advising side, know how that process works, and it's not an easy one by any stretch, because obviously you've got when you're looking to get you can't just create a major one day and say okay, or recategorize an existing major as a STEM major. It actually has to be recognized and approved through the zip code that every major has at your institution. Your registrar's office will have information on this if you're not already familiar with the process. But the Department of Education sets up zip codes for institutional majors, and they have to fall within certain categories and those categories in order to get on the list of STEM designated programs. That list, if you're not aware, is controlled by the Department of Homeland Security as it relates to, for specifically international students' access to STEM programs. But the actual field of study list is from the Department of Education's classification of instructional programs taxonomy. and those are what I was talking about earlier, the SIP codes. Those SIP codes are, again, those exist in government land. So this is information that Homeland Security puts out, the list of the existing SIP codes and the majors that fall within that is, I've just posted that in the comments section, so please refer to that as you go. But for institutions to make their majors STEM eligible, they work with, as they put these together, and work with the registrar's office to determine what SIP codes these new majors may fall under. That's important. What it's meant for Robert Smith College of Business at the University of Maryland is their Masters of Science in Information Systems has been STEM eligible for a number of years. But they've also offered a master. They have a Master of Finance already, but they've also added another version of that to a Master's of Quantitative Finance. That is STEM eligible because of additional credit hours where they're drilling down on financial modeling, forecasting, and analytics. So they have a Master's of Accounting that isn't STEM eligible. They now have a Master's of Science in Business and Management that is not. So they have those kind of programs that are, but they're being creative in how they view their offerings for international students as a way to attract them. So it does require a lot of work to get to that point with institutions, within institutions, to get them to realize that they need to be focusing on these types of issues, whether it's a new master's in marketing analytics or supply chain management, besides just information system, business analytics, quantitative finance, those things that Maryland has implemented successfully at the master's level. By taking the approach that you need to be more creative in your offerings, if you want to continue to attract international students. I think that's something, a bottom line, that we certainly would like, and it certainly is a benefit for all institutions as they're looking to maintain their edge internationally. So I always recommend just being as creative as possible in these situations, because as the law stands now, STEM eligibility is the door to that extra couple of years for every degree level completed. But it's not going to change. That STEM laws could change. There's been rumors of that happening. The OPT STEM extensions would be done away with, but nothing is done. Nothing is written in stone yet, and certainly there would be a long road and phase-in period if that was to happen over a number of years. But let's hope that doesn't happen. Certainly that would be a big detriment to continuing to attract quality international students to these shores. Thank you, Guyan, for joining us from Armenia. I hope you are well. It's good to see you connecting, and hopefully you can see me. What I'd like to finish with are just a couple of light elements. For those of you who know me, certainly International ACAC is a conference I've attended many years since the mid-90s. I've been going on and off to International ACACs. This year the conference is in New Orleans in the Big Easy, and Tulane and Loyola New Orleans are hosting that event. And I wish I could be there and be with you all as you celebrate. And this year, amazingly, over 1,400 attendees at the conference from around the world, from U.S. and other overseas universities to college and guidance counselors from 100 countries. So really an impressive group, and hope you're doing well. What I would say, for those of you who do know me, you know I am a big fan of Dodgeball and a former champion, I will say, in the Dodgeball arena, and I have my winner's medal from 2012 at the University of Denver. And shout out to Marjorie Smith and her team there. Put on one of the best conferences that OACAC, now International ACAC, has ever had. That was an amazing event there, and wish my friends and colleagues on my team 4 and several beers ago. Wish them luck as they look to defend their title that they took back last year at Case Western, and I wish them all the best of luck tonight in the Dodgeball tournament. So go four score. And for those of you who are World Cup fans and soccer fans, you know, there's just one thing that I have left to say. For those of you who know where I was born, this is particularly relevant for me, and I'll just close with this. It's coming home. So wish you all a very good day and excellent rest of the week, and we'll talk to you all soon in another week, and wish you the best of luck as you move forward. So I'll leave you with my favorite song.
We're not creative enough, we're not positive enough.
It's coming home, it's coming home, it's coming, football's coming home.
We'll go on getting back, so getting back, so getting back, so getting back.
It's coming, football's coming.